Hi, everyone, and welcome to our final lecture lesson video of the semester. I can't believe the semester is already ending. I'm so proud of the writing that I've seen from you all. So many of you have taken chances and tried new things, and I'm over the moon impressed with the work I'm seeing. Today I took some requests from what students had written about in their midterms and in other things. So I wanted to spend some time talking about publishing in literary magazines. I know some of you are working on longer book length pieces, and that's not something I have a whole lot of experience with, although I'm happy to find some resources for you. But I did want to talk more about literary magazines where you publish a particular piece or so. So let me share my screen. Start the slideshow. Okay, so publishing in literary magazines. These are magazines that publish either all or mostly creative writing, although some, depending on when you're writing, you may find some online websites and things that are a little bit less literary, but still publish some literary things. And I'll talk about an example of that as well. But yeah, let's dive into the world of publication. For our purposes today, I'm going to talk about 3 different types of journals. One is focused on a single school, and it's for the students that attend there, sometimes faculty, but primarily students. And then there are journals that are online and some that are in print. And I didn't put it on here, but a lot of journals that have been consistently in print are also starting to have an online presence. As far as single school focused, I did want to draw your attention to the Jefferson Review. The link in this slide will take you to the online or PDF version of this year's journal. Due dates are typically in the first week of March, and it comes out every academic year in the spring. And I'm always impressed by the level of writing that students here are doing. There's also a cash prize. So if you were trying to just get your feet wet and you're a little afraid of a larger pool and you're just wanting to maybe get like a publication or so, this is a good place to start. I actually published here when I was a student many years ago. I don't even know if that edition still exists. But it was fun and it was very affirming. You get a copy of the journal. The top creative writing piece gets a monetary prize, and they also take visual art, and that also gets a financial prize. So it's pretty exciting. Looking for journals outside of school, you want to keep some things in mind. You want to be familiar with what's out there. So just find some journals, especially the online ones, often don't have a fee to read, and just see what they're publishing. See what type of writing they tend to accept and tend to promote. Do they have submission fees? A lot of journals, the readers are not paid, the editors are not paid, but they try to pay their writers. Or if it's an online journal, they have database costs and storage. And if it's a print journal, of course, they have printing and mailing costs. And if it's a journal like that, there may be a small fee to submit because they use that money to take care of the costs of the journal. Some journals pay in money and some pay in what they call exposure, which is always frustrating when you're like, okay, I can't pay my bills with exposure. But it's also nice to get your name out there. Some of my favorite journals that I've published in didn't pay. And some of the ones that I have gotten paid for, I didn't feel like I got the same level of audience, and the reach was a little bit more narrow. So that's kind of something you have to weigh. You may want to check out submission rates. How many people tend to submit? And how many pieces do they tend to accept? Just to give you an idea of what the competition may look like. Not that that means you shouldn't publish for that. You shouldn't submit to that journal. But it is something to keep in mind. And also, how well would your writing fit? which is why it's important, again, to be familiar with what's out there. If you're writing science fiction and you're submitting to a journal that doesn't ever publish science fiction, they're probably not going to accept your piece. So you want to be familiar with the style of writers they tend to publish, the genres and subgenres. A lot of journals don't take creative nonfiction, although that's changing. A lot of literary journals tend to just focus on poetry and fiction. But then there are some journals that just publish flash fiction. There are some journals that just publish flash nonfiction. There are some journals that just publish poetry, and so on. So that regardless of what you're writing, there's a journal out there for you. It just may take some looking and some digging. So let's talk about how to find these publication opportunities. And I'm going to focus on two websites that I use and a lot of writers I know use, and that's Submittable and New Pages. Submittable.com I use a lot. It has a tracker. And so many literary magazines and journals use Submittable for their submissions, where you just submit through the Submittable website. You have a profile that's already set up, and you just have to write a cover letter, attach a file, and it goes straight to the journal. It's free to writers, and I love it because of the tracker. A lot of my pieces are still under my maiden name because I started publishing before I got married. But as you can see on the side, this is just a screenshot of the ones at the top, and there's a lot there that were declined. There were some that were withdrawn because they were published somewhere else. And some of them were submitted somewhere else that didn't use Submittable, so that's why those acceptances aren't there. But it's really handy to keep track of something. So if you're submitting a piece, and let's say you're like, okay, this journal is looking for this. Have I submitted to that journal before? And sometimes it's hard to remember. So this is a good way to keep track of submissions. I also sometimes will keep a spreadsheet, but I am really bad at updating my spreadsheet, which is why I'm not showing it here, because I don't even know where it is right now, because I haven't submitted in a while. But Submittable is really great because it updates it when the editors from that journal update it. They'll let you know when it's accepted, if it's rejected or declined. It'll remind you that you withdrew a piece, and it lets you know if it's in progress, which means they're probably still looking at it. Some journals have really long reading periods, so if it says in progress for a while, that's okay. Don't panic. That doesn't mean that they hate it. Honestly, if it's still being looked at, it means they're at least considering it, which is always good. But the other thing that I love about Submittable is a newer thing that they're doing, which is when you sign in and you have your free account, you go to discover opportunities, and they'll be organized by date or deadline, or some that have no deadline. And you can look through, there's a drop down menu where you select different things that you're looking for. Maybe you're looking for just nonfiction or just all creative writing. Maybe you're looking for a nonprofit or places that publish social justice writing. Anything like that, that they may have a like a search term or a keyword set up, that this will show up. So on the right hand side of this screen, I wanted to just look for nonfiction. And I didn't really look for tags, I just looked for just nonfiction. I could have narrowed it for a while. And as you can see, like there's some that it shows that don't have deadlines, some have reading fees, some don't. And then they're organized by the newest deadline, or the one that's coming up, the one that's coming fastest, which is something that you want to keep in mind too. Hey, this journal looks really great. Their deadline is tomorrow. Do I have something I can get to them tomorrow? The thing with Submittable, the only thing that is a downside for me is that there's a fee for the journals. So typically journals that post on Submittable are larger journals. They're more well-known, or they have some sort of financial backing behind them. So it means that if it's a journal that's just a startup, it doesn't really have a whole lot of finances behind it, then they may not get to be published, or they may not be able to be shown on Submittable, which is why I also go to newpages.com. It's a free site and it's great. It has so many resources. There's a blog where people will just write about different writing things. They have a classifieds for different upcoming they'll advertise programs that are like Master of Fine Arts and Creative Writing. Spalding was on the page when I went to New Pages, and that's where I got my MFA, and they were pretty great. They will also have writing contests, publication opportunities. So contests are where there's a fee, but there's also a larger prize, and you're up against several writers to win an award. Sometimes there's publication, sometimes there's not. But what the other thing that New Pages has that Submittable doesn't is they also talk about writing retreats and workshops. Where if you just need like a weekend away to work on a piece of writing, there will be a whole section on workshops or on retreats. If you want to take a short workshop that's focused on a specific type of writing, that will be advertised there too. And if you are interested in those workshops, I also recommend checking out Louisville Literary Arts. It's a local organization, of course, and they run either in person or virtual workshops all the time. I just did one on writing about drama. It was really great. But they've done others, and it's just really a good opportunity to get out there and workshop with other writers and to network with other writers. Because honestly, sometimes if you get published, sometimes it's just from knowing people. You know other writers, and they happen to be serving as a guest editor for a journal, and they may ask you if you have something. So sometimes it's just the luck of the draw. And networking is always a good way to decide or to find places to publish. New Pages has these calls for submissions that are very, very similar to Submittable, where you can narrow by genre or the type of publication. They don't have a submission engine on New Pages site, so it sends you to an outside link or sometimes by email, which is also fine. And some of the pieces that I've gotten published were sent through email, and honestly, the only downside for that for me is just an organization thing, and we're trying to remember what I have sent out through email as opposed to what I have on like Submittable. Something else to consider when you look at either New Pages or Submittable is that they may have, they'll say whether you can check to see if the journal is online or if it's in print. And whether or not, whichever decision you make for that is usually a very personal decision. There for a while, there was like this idea that print journals were more prestigious or better. And it's always nice to have something you can hold in your hand that you've published. It just feels very real and tangible. The downside of that is that your readership is going to be smaller because not everyone, these only subscribers to that journal or magazine will receive it. So if there's a piece that you feel like needs to be out there and you want it to be shared a lot, an online journal may be your best bet. And a lot of print journals are also starting to have an online presence because they're realizing this. So let's talk about the flip side of publication, which is rejection. There's not a writer out there that doesn't get rejected sometimes. There's even a website, I forgot what it was, but it was basically like you could go and read the rejection letters that famous writers got for their novels and works of like classic literature, which is really comforting when you've gotten a lot of rejections. Most writers are rejected many more times than they're accepted, than their pieces are accepted. And this has turned into a lot of writers will do something called the 100 rejections in a year challenge, where you try to get rejected from 100 places. Because if you're getting rejected, it means you're submitting. You can't be published if you're not putting your work out there. And it's not going to be accepted if you're too afraid of rejection. Rejection honestly happens for so many reasons, and it's very rarely a personal reason. They may have a piece that they just accepted that was just too similar. Maybe you're writing on a similar topic and they're like, well, we just don't want another piece about pet cats in this journal. So sorry. Or they've published a lot of those in the past and they're like, we're tired of pet cats. We want to write, we want to publish other things. That doesn't mean that your writing was wrong or not good. It just means that it wasn't a fit for that issue. Or it may just not quite fit the journal, what they tend to publish, or the requirements, which is why it's important to pay attention on submission calls to find out what the requirements are. A lot of journals, even if they love your piece, if it goes over the word count, they won't publish it, especially if it's print, because they just have less space. Sometimes it's a guest editor. I've submitted a piece to the same journal twice because I didn't know who the guest editor was the first time. And it was someone that I had as a workshop leader before. And I just knew that he didn't like how I approach structure. So in that sense, I knew it wasn't about my writing. It was just that guest editor wasn't for me. But the next guest editor was. And sometimes it's just luck. They may love your piece, but they're full. Sometimes it could just be an editor having a bad day and rejecting a lot of things. When I was at Spalding, every semester we had to read a certain number of pieces that were submitted to a literary journal through Spalding. And honestly, a lot of people waited until the last minute to fulfill that requirement and they were rushed. So there were probably pieces that didn't get through that probably should have. And that's nothing against the writers who are submitting. It's just the luck of the draw. Many of us are writing about some pretty serious topics. And sometimes that just may trigger the editor. And they're like, I can't work with that piece. And that's fine too. But you can't be accepted and published if you don't try and get rejected. However, there are some tips. If you get an editor that responds to you with feedback, first of all, that is a high compliment because it means they care enough about your talent and the piece's potential to try to give you some suggestions. Keep that in mind, but don't consider it the be all end all. It may actually not work for your piece, and sometimes that's just up to the editor's taste. So at least be willing to consider feedback, even if you don't use it. The more you submit, of course, the higher the chances that someone will bite. And like I said, sometimes it's just a numbers game. I've had one piece that I submitted once and it got published, and that only happened that one time and it'll never happen again. Other pieces have been rejected so many times before they've been published. And I'll talk about one of those stories. But it's just a matter of getting out there and seeing what's out there. Well, I always tend to look for journals and magazines that accept simultaneous submissions. And they'll say that on like the submission guidelines. I don't tend to submit to journals that don't accept simultaneous submissions unless it's like a gold journal. So Creative Nonfiction Magazine for a long time wasn't accepting simultaneous submissions, but I would still submit to them because I really loved their journal. And that's still like my gold standard dream journal to be published in. Also, Brevity is the other one, but they accept simultaneous submissions. But all that means is that they are okay with knowing that you're submitting your pieces to other journals. So I will send one piece out to 17 journals sometimes. And as soon as one of them accepts, then I'll withdraw it from the other places, which is why you saw on that submittable tracker so many pieces that said withdrawn. It had been accepted somewhere else, so I had to pull it back from the other places. If they reject you, but request more work from you, send it. This is something that I didn't know until my MFA program, and I was working through the Louisville Review, which is Spalding's journal, and saw that there were ranked rejections. So there's like a form letter, then there's a personalized letter that says a little bit about the piece, and then there's one that says we really enjoyed it, but it wasn't, this piece just didn't work for this. issue, please send us more. That means they really like your writing and your style, but that piece just may not work. If they want more from you, send it. Most journals get more than they can ever hope to publish. If they're requesting more from you, it means that you have something they appreciate. Network. Reach out to writers you admire. First of all, most of us, when we write, we don't know if anyone's ever going to read it. And if you can send a writer an email and say, hey, I really love this piece, that will make their day. But also it means that you can kind of get an idea of where they're publishing, especially if they're writing similar things. You don't want to say, hey, tell me everything. But you can say, hey, I really love this piece that was published here. I'd like to hear more about your journey if you would like to talk about it. Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. I've had some really good luck. But also follow editors and writers on social media. There are always writers on Twitter and editors on Twitter that will post like calls for certain types of pieces. Find online writing groups. I'm in a few that are associated with like binders full of writers, and it's basically for women and gender non-conforming writers who are trying to get published, and there's different sub-binders. But I found a lot of calls through there, and I've networked, and so I could say, hey, I'm part of this group. And sometimes if the editor is also part of that group, they may look at your piece first, which probably isn't the most fair thing in the world, but sometimes with writing, you got to take the advantages you can. And also celebrate rejection, because if you're submitting your pieces and putting them out there, that means that you're trying, and that's more than a lot of writers will do. The last thing I want to end with, since I just talked about rejection, is to talk about a particular piece that I had a nightmare of a time getting accepted. This was a piece, I wrote it about my journey coming out as a queer person, growing up in a very religious household, and how an episode of Supernatural in season 11, where God is revealed, we found out Chuck is the character of God, and also as he was a human on Earth, or masquerading as a human on Earth, he dated men and women. And there was just one line in the episode, and it was really meaningful for me. So I wrote the piece, and I was able to meet the actor and talk to him a little bit about that episode and his feelings about it. And we took like a really cool photo op with a pride flag. It was great. He's amazing. But that's a whole side note. But when I went to send it out, I was looking for pieces that were publishing Pride Month pieces, and also places that I knew would publish things that had to do with pulp culture, because a lot of journals won't publish pieces that are about television or comics or all of the things I tend to write about. And then some journals don't want to publish LGBTQ pieces, but also because I wanted it to come out during Pride Month, I also knew that the journals that take LGBTQ plus pieces were probably getting a lot of submissions. I submitted it to 20 journals and online magazines and was rejected from all 20. And my least favorite or most frustrating rejections I put on the slide, because within 2 days from each other, Salon said that Supernatural was too niche for their audience, and narratively said that they were looking for more niche interest, and Supernatural was too popular. I was like, okay, is there a journal in the middle of you two? At the same time, I was following this online fandom magazine that started from a group of Supernatural fans and has become much bigger. Now they're talking about Marvel and other things. But they don't usually accept submissions from anyone else. They have a writing staff themselves. But I was like, you know what? I'm just frustrated. So I sent this in to Nerds and Beyond, which is the website, and they liked it and they accepted it. They sent me a few edits. I had to shorten it down. But not only did they like it and publish it, but I lucked into the fact that the actor who played Chuck/God, Rob Benedict, also follows the journal. So he read my piece and retweeted it, and it was pretty awesome. But I'm sharing this story because this was a piece that I knew was good. And I don't always know that my writing is good. Often I struggle with knowing how readers are going to accept it, but I knew this piece was good. I had workshopped it with some friends. I had sent it to some former workshop leaders and we talked about it. It was pretty polished and it was ready to go. But I also knew that I was writing about a topic, two different topics that are very niche. Sexuality and the LGBTQ plus community, of course, and then also a television show. And I thought honestly that I would have an easier time getting it accepted than I did, which is why sometimes you have to remember not to take rejection personally, because I did. And basically I sent it to Nerds and Beyond knowing that they weren't going to accept it, but I just had to try. And I lucked into them taking it. They were doing some Pride Month spotlights. They were saving that character for last. And I got lucky. So all that to say, if I had been very bummed out by, I mean, I was bummed out, but if I had let being bummed out from all 20 of those journals keep me from trying more places and different places, and sometimes thinking outside the box, which is always helpful, then that piece would have never been shared. And it had, I think, the biggest reading reach or readership reach that I've had of any published piece that I'm aware of. Because like I said, we don't always know if our pieces are being read. So yeah, I hope you found that helpful. I would be glad to talk with you more about any piece you're thinking about submitting. If you're not sure about how to get it ready for submission, there's other things like cover letters that you may want to research how to write. Because often if the cover letter doesn't show that you've read that journal, then they may not take it seriously or be willing to accept it. But yeah, I would be willing to talk about any questions you have, and have a wonderful break.